Introduction and Analysis. The Republic of Plato is the longest of his works, with the exception of the Laws, and is certainly the greatest of them. They are nearer approaches to modern metaphysics in the Philebus and in the Sophists. The Politicus or statement is more ideal. The form and institutions of the state are more clearly drawn out in the laws as work of art. The symposium of Phytagoras are of higher excellence, but no longer dialogue of Plato has the same largeness of view and the same perfection of style. No other shows an equal knowledge of the world or contains more of those thoughts which are newly as well as which are new as well as old, and not of one age only but of all. Nowhere in Plato is there a deeper irony or a greater wealth of humor or imagery or more dramatic power. Nor in any other of his writings is the attempt made to interweave life and speculation or to connect politics with philosophy. The Republic is the center around with the other dialogues may be grouped. Here philosophy reaches the highest point, cp. especially in Book 5, 6, 7, to which ancient thinkers even attain. Plato, among the Greeks, like Bacon, among the moderns, was the first who conceived a method of knowledge, although neither of them always distinguished the bare outline or form of form from the substance of truth, and both of them had to be content with an abstraction of science which was not yet realized. He was greater metaphysical genius whom the world has seen, and in him more than in any other ancient thinker, the gem of future knowledge are contained. The sciences of logic and psychology, which has applied so many instruments of thought to after ages, are based upon the analysis of Socrates and Plato. The principles of definition, the law of contradiction, the fallacy of arguing in a cycle, the distinction between the essence and antecedents of a thing or notion, between means and ends, between causes and conditions, also the division of the mind into the rational, concupiscent, and irascible elements of pleasures and desires, into necessary and unnecessary. This and other great forms of thought are all of them to be found in the Republic, and were probably first invented by Plato. The greatest of all logical truths, the one of which writers on philosophy are, are most apt to lose sight. The difference between words and things has been most strenuously insisted on by him. C.P. Rep. Polit. Cato, although he has not always avoided the confusion of them in his own writings, e.g. Rep. But he does not bind up truth in logical formulae. Logic is still found in metaphysics, and the science which he imagines to contemplate all truth and all existence is very unlike the doctrine of the syllogism which Aristotle claims to have discovered. Soft LNG. Neither must we forget that the Republic is but the third part of a still larger design, which was to have included an ideal history of Athens, as well as a political physical philosophy. The fragment of Critias has given birth to a world famous fiction. Secondly, in importance to the tale of Troy and the legend of Arthur, and is said as a fact to have inspired some of the early navigators of the 16th century. This mythical tale, on which his subject was a history of the wars of the Athenians against the island of Atlantis, is supposed to be founded upon an unfinished poem of Solon, to which it would have stood in the same relation as the writings of the logographers to the poems of Homer. It would have told of a struggle for liberty, CPT, intended to represent the conflict of Persia and Hellas. Here we may judge from the noble commencement of the Timaeus, from the fragment of Critias itself, and from the third book of the Laws, in what manner Plato would have treated this high argument. We can only question why the great design was abandoned, perhaps because Plato became sensible of some incongruity in the fictitious history, or because he had lost his interest in it, or because advancing years forbade the completion of it, and we may please ourselves with the fancy that had this imaginary narrative ever been finished, we should have found Plato himself sympathizing with the struggle for Hellenic independence, Scipio's sing a hymn of triumph over Marathon and Salamis, perhaps making the reflection of Herodotus, where he contemplates the growth of the Athenian Empire. How brave a thing is freedom of speech, which has which has made the Athenians so far exceed every other state of Hellas in greatness, or more probably attributing the victory to the ancient good order of Athens and to the father of Apollo and Athens, ship in truth to Critias. Again, Plato may be regarded as the captain archegos, or leader of a goodly band of followers, for in the Republic is to be found the original Ciceros de Republica of Saint Augustine, city of God, of the Utopia of Sir Thomas More, and the numerous other imaginary states which are framed upon the same model. The extent to which Aristotle of the Aristotelian school were indebted to him in the politics has been little recognized, and the recognition is the more necessary because it is not made by Aristotle himself. The two philosophers had more in common than they were conscious of, and probably some elements of Plato remain still undetected in Aristotle. In English philosophy too, many affinities may be traced, not only in the works of the Cambridge Platonists, but in great original writers like Berkeley or Coleridge to Plato and his ideas. That there is a truth higher than experience, of which the mind bears witness to herself, is a conviction which in our own generation has been enthusiastically asserted, and is perhaps gaining ground. Of the Greek authors who, at the Renaissance, brought a new life into the word, Plato has had the greatest influence. The Republic of Plato is also the first treatise upon education, of which the writings of Milton and Locke, Rousseau, Jean-Paul, and Goethe are the legitimate descendants. Like Dante or Bunyan, he has a revelation of another life. Like Bacon, is profoundly impressed with the unity of knowledge. In the early church, he exercised a great influence on theology, and at the revival of literature on politics. Even the fragments of his words, were repeated as second-hand hymns, have in all ages ravished the hearts of men who have seen reflected in them their own higher nature. He is the father of idealism in philosophy, in politics, in literature, and many of the latest conceptions of modern thinkers and statesmen, such as the unity of knowledge, the reign of law, and the equality of the sexes, have been anticipated in a dream by him. The argument of the Republic is the search after justice, the nature of which is first hinted at by Cephalus, the just and blameless old man, then discussed on the basis of proverbial morality of Socrates, and Polemarchus, then caricatured by Thrasymachus and partially explained by Socrates, reduced to an abstraction of Glaucon and Adeimantus, and having become invisible in the individual reappears at the length in the ideal state which is constructed by Socrates. The first care of the rulers is to be education, of which an outline is drawn after the old Hellenic model, providing only for an improved religion and morality, more simplicity in music and gymnastic, a manlier strain of poetry, and greater harmony of the individual and the state. We are thus led on the conception of higher state, in which no man calls anything his own, and in which there is neither marrying nor giving in marriage, and kings are philosophers, and philosophers are kings. There is another and higher education, intellectual as well as moral and religious, of science as well as of art, and not of youth only not not of youth only, but the whole of life. Such a state is hardly to be realized in this world, and quickly degenerates to be the perfect ideal succeeded. The government of the soldier and the lawfare of honor. This again declining into democracy, and democracy into tyranny, in an imaginary but regular order having not much resemblance to the actual facts. When the will has come full cycle, we do not begin again at a new period of human life, but we have passed from the best to the worst, and there we end. The subject is then changed, and the old career of poetry and the old career of poetry and philosophy, which had been more rightly treated in the earlier books of the Republic, is now resumed and fought out to a conclusion. Poetry is discovered to be an imitation thrice removed from the truth, and Homer, as well as the dramatic poets, having been condemned as an imitator, is sent into banishment along with them, and the idea of the state is supplemented by the revelation of a future life. The division into books, like all similar divisions, CP Sir G.C. Lewis in the Classical Museum is probably later than the age of Plato. The natural divisions are five in number: Book 1 and the first half of Book 2 down to the paragraph beginning. I had always admired the genius Glaucon and Adeimantus, which introductory. The first book containing a refutation of the popular and sophistical notions of justice, and concluding, like some of the earlier dialogues, without, without arriving at any definite result. To this, to this is appended is a restatement of the nature of justice according to common opinion, as an answer is demanded to the question, what is justice, stripped of appearance. The second division, including the remainder of the second and the whole of the third and fourth books, which are mainly occupied with the construction of the first state and the first education. The third division, 3, consists of the fifth, sixth, and seventh books, in which philosophy rather than justice is the subject of inquiry, and the second state is constructed on principles of communism, and ruled by philosophers. The contemplation of the idea good of good text takes the place of the social and political features. In the eighth book and in the eighth and ninth books, the perfections of states and the individuals who correspond to them as reviewed in succession, and the nature of pleasure are the principle of tyranny, are further analyzed in the individual man. The tenth book is the conclusion of the whole, in which the relations of philosophy to poetry are finally determined, and the happiness of the citizens of this life, which has now been assured, is crowned by the division of another, or a more general division into two parts, may be adopted. The first, Book 1 until 4, containing the description of a state framed generally in accordance with Hellenic notions of religion and morality, while in the second, book 5 until 10, the Hellenic state is transformed into an ideal kingdom of philosophy, of which all other governments are the perfections. These 2 points of view are really opposed, and the opposition is only felt by the genius of Plato. The Republic, like the Phaedrus, see introduction to Phaedrus, is an imperfect whole. The higher, the higher light of philosophy breaks to the regularity of Hellenic temple, which at last spreads away into the heavens. Whether whether this imperfection of structure arises from an enlargement of the plan or from the imperfect reconcilement in the writer's own mind of the striking elements of thought which are now first brought together by him, or perhaps from the composition of the work at different times at different times occasions, like the similar occasion about the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are worth asking, but which cannot have a distinct answer. In the age of Plato, there was no regular mode of publication, and another would have the less scruple in altering or adding to work which was known only to a few of his friends. There is no absurdity in supposing that he may have laid his labours aside for a time, or turned from one work to another, and such interruptions would be more likely to occur in the case of a long than of a short writing. In all attempts to determine the chronological order of the Platonic writings on internal evidence, this uncertainty about any single dialogue being composed at one time is a disturbing element which must be admitted to affect longer works such as the Republic and the laws more than shorter ones. But on the other hand, the same discrepancies of the Republic may only may, may only arise out of the discordant elements which the philosopher has attempted to unite in a single whole, perhaps without being himself able to recognize the inconsistency which appeals to us. For there is a judgment of after ages which few great writers have ever been able to anticipate for themselves. They do not perceive the want of connection in their other writings, in their own writings, or the gaps in their systems which are visible enough to those who come after them. In the beginnings of literature and philosophy, amid the first efforts of thought and language, more inconsistencies occurs than now, when the paths of speculation are well worn and the meaning of the words precisely defined. For consistency too is God of time, and some of the greatest creations of human mind have been wanting in unity. Tried by the test, several of Platonic dialogues, according to our modern ideas, appear to be defective, but the deficiency is no proof that they were composed at different times or by different hands. And the supposition that the Republic was written uninterruptedly by a continuous effort is in some degree confirmed by the numerous references from one part of the work to another. The second title, concerning justice, is not the one by which the Republic is quoted, either by Aristotle or generally in antiquity, and like the other second titles of the Platonic dialogues, may therefore be assumed to be of later date. Morgenstern and others have asked whether the definition of justice, which is the professed aim or the construction of the state, is the principal argument of the work. The answer is that the two blend in one, and are two faces on the same truth. For justice is the order of state, The state is the visible embodiment of justice under the conditions of human society. The one is the soul, the other is the body, and the great ideal of the state as of the individual is a fair mind in a fair body. In Hegelian physiology, the state is reality, of which justice is the idea. Order, described in Christian language, the kingdom of heaven is within, and yet develops into a just or external kingdom. The house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens, is reduced to the proportions of an earthly building. Or, to use a Platon image, justice and the state are the warp and the woof which run through the whole texture. And when the constitution of the state is completed, the conception of justice is not dismissed, but reappears under the same or different names throughout the work, both as the inner law of the individual soul and finally as the principle of rewards and punishments in another life. The virtues are based on justice, of which common honesty in buying and selling is the shadow, and justice is based on the idea of good, which is the harmony of the world, and is reflected both in the institutions of states and in motions of the heavenly bodies. CP team. The Timaeus, which takes up the political rather than the ethical side of the Republic, and is chiefly occupied with hypotheses concerning the outward world, yet contains many indications that the same law is supposed to reign over the state, over nature, and over man. Too much, however, has been made of this question both in ancient and modern times. There is a stage of criticism in which all works, whether of nature or of art, are referred to design, now in ancient writings and indeed in literature generally. There remains often a last element which was not comprehended in the original design, for the plan goes under the author's hand. New thoughts occur to him in the act of writing. He has not worked out of the argument to the end before he begins. The reader who seeks to find some one idea under which the whole may be conceived must necessarily seize on the vaguest and more general, the Stahlbaum, who is dissatisfied with the ordinary explanations of the argument of the Republic, imagines himself to have found the true argument in the representation of human life in a state perfected by justice, and governed according to the idea of good. There may be some use in such general descriptions, but they can hardly be said to express the design of the writer. The truth is that we may as well speak of many designs as of one, nor did anything be excluded from the plan of a great work to which the mind is naturally led by the association of ideas, and which does not interfere with the general purpose. What kind of degree of unity is to be sought after in a building, in the plastic arts, in poetry, in prose, is a problem which has to be determined relatively to the subject matter. To Plato himself, the inquiry what was the intention of the writer, or what was the principal argument of the Republic, would have been hardly intelligible, and therefore had better be at once dismissed. CP. The introduction to the Phaedrus. Is not Republic the vehicle of three or four great truths which, to Plato's own mind, are most naturally represented in the form of the state, just as in the Jewish prophets the reign of Messiah, or the day of Lord, or the suffering servant of people of God, or the son of the righteousness with healing in his wings, only convey to us at least the great spiritual ideals. So too, the great state Plato reveals to us his own thoughts about divine perfection, which is the idea of good, like the sun is indivisible in the divisible world, about human perfection, which is justice, about education beginning in youth and continuing in later years, about poets and sophists and tyrants, who are the false teachers and ever look and evil rulers of mankind, about the world which is embodiment of them, about a king which exists nowhere upon earth but is laid up in heaven to be pattern and rule of human life. No such inspired creation is at unity with itself, any more than the clouds of heaven when the sun pierces through them. Every shade of light and dark, of truth and of fiction which is the field of truth, is allowable in the work of philosophical imagination. It is not all the same plane. It easily passes from ideas to myths and fancies, from facts to figures of speech. It is not prose, but poetry, at least a great part of it, and ought not to be judged by the rules of logic and probabilities of history. The writer is not fashioning his ideas into an artistic whole. They take possession of him and are too much for him. We have no need therefore to discuss whether a state such as Plato have conceived is practicable or not, or whether the outward from the inward life came first into the mind of the writer. For practicability of his ideas has nothing to do with the truth, and the highest thoughts to which he attains may be truly to bear the greatest marks of design, justice, more than the external framework of the state, the idea of good more than justice, the great science of dialectic of organization of the ideas has no real content, but is only a type of method or spirit in which the higher knowledge is to be pursued by the spectator of all time and all existence. It is it is in the fifth, sixth, and seventh books that Plato reached the summit of speculation, and this, although they fail to satisfy the requirements of a modern thinker, may therefore be regarded as the most important, as they are also the most original portions of the book. It is not necessary to discuss at length a minor question which has been raised by both respecting the imaginary date at which the confession was held, the year 411 BC, which is proposed by him. By him will do as well as any other. For a writer of fiction, and especially a writer who, like Plato, is notoriously careless of chronology, CP, rep, simp, etc., only aims at general probability. Whether all the persons mentioned in the Republic could ever have met at any one time is not a difficulty which would have occurred to an Athenian reading the work 40 years later, or to Plato himself at the time of writing any more than two Shakespeare respecting one of his own dramas, and need not greatly trouble us now. Yet this may be a question having no answer, which is still worth asking, because the investigation shows that we can argue historically from the dates in Plato. It would be useless therefore to waste time in inventing far-fetched reconcilements of them in order to avoid chronological difficulties, such, for example, as the conjecture of C.F. Hermann that Glaucon and Adimantus are not the brothers but the uncle of Plato, C.P. Apol, or the fancy of Stalbaum that Plato intentionally left anachronisms indicating the dates at which some of his dialogues were written. The principal characters in the Republic are Cephalus, Polemarchus, Thrasymachus, Socrates, Glaucon, and Adimantus. Cephalus appears in the introduction only. Polemarchus drops at the end of the first argument, and Thrasymachus is reduced to silence at the close of the first book. The main discussion is carried on by Socrates, Glaucus, and Adimantus. Among the company are Lysias, the orator, Euthydemus, the son of Cephalus, and the brothers of Polemarchus, and Anaxagoras. These are mute auditors. Also there is Cleitophon, who once interrupts, where, as in the dialogue which bears his name, he appears as the friend and ally of Thrasymachus. Cephalus, the party of the house, has been appropriately engaged in offering a sacrifice. He is the burden of an old man who is almost done with life, and is at peace with her, with himself, and with all mankind. He feels that he is drawing nearer to the world below, and seems to linger around the memory of the past. He is eager that Socrates should come to visit him, fond of poetry of the last generation, having happy in the consciousness of a well-spent life, glad at having escaped from the tyranny of youthful lust. His love of conversation, his salvation, his indifference to riches, even his garrulity and interesting traits of character. He is not one of those who have nothing to say because their whole mind has been absorbed in making money. Yet he acknowledges that riches have the advantage of placing men of the temptation to dishonesty or falsehood. The respectful attention shown to him by Socrates, whose love of conversation, no less than the mission imposed upon him by the oracle, leads him to ask questions of all men, young and old alike, should also be noted. Who better suited to answer the question of justice than Cephalus, whose life might seem to be the expression of it? The moderation with the moderation with which old age is pictured by Cephalus, a very tolerable portion of existence, is characteristic not only of him, but of Greek feeling generally, and contrasts with the exaggeration of Cicero in the Senectute. The evening of life is described by Plato in the most expressive manner, yet with the fewest possible touches. As Cicero remarks, EP at, at, at Attic, the age Cephalus would have been out of the place in a discussion which follows, and which he could neither have understood nor taken part in without a violation of dramatic propriety. C.P. Limachus in the Laces. His son and heir, Polymachus has the frankness and impetus of youth. He is for detaining Socrates by force in the opening scene, and will not let him off on the subject of women and children. Cephalus is limited in his point of view, and represents the proverbial stage of morality, which has rules of life rather than principles, and he quotes Simonides, C.B. Aristotle's, as his father had quoted Pindar. But after this he has no more to say. The answers which he makes are only elicited from him by the dialectic of Socrates. He has not yet experienced the influence of the sophists like Glaucon and Adeimantus, nor is he sensible of the necessity of refuting them. He belongs to the pre-Socratic or pre-dialectical age. He is incapable of arguing, and is bewildered by Socrates to such a degree that he does not know what he is saying. He is made to admit that justice is a thief, and that the virtues follow the analogy of the arts. From his brothers, for his brother Lysias contra Erastos, we learn that he fell a victim to the 30 tyrants, but no allusion is here made to his fate, nor, not, nor the circumstance that Cephalus and his family were of Syracusan origin, and had migrated from Turin to Athens. The Chalcedonian giant Thrasymachus, of whom we have already heard in the Phaedrus, is the personification of sophists, according to Plato's conception of them. in somewhat of their worst characteristics. He is vain and blustering, refusing to discuss unless he is paid, fond of making an oration, and hoping thereby to escape the inevitable Socrates, but a mere child in argument, and unable to foresee that the next move to use a Platonic expression, will shut him up. He has reached he has reached the stage of, of framing general notions, and in this respect, in and in this respect, is in advance of Cephalus and Polemarchus. But he is incapable of defending them in the discussion, and fairly tries to cover his confusion with banter and insolence. Whether such doctrines as are attributed to him by Plato were really held either by him or by any other sophist is uncertain. In the infancy of philosophy, serious errors about morality might might easy, might easily go up. There are certainty put into mouths of speakers in Thucydides, but we are concerned at present with Plato's description of him, and not with the historical reality. The inequality of this the contest, adds greatly in the humor of Hussein. The pompous and empty sophist is utterly helpless in the hands of great master of dialectic, who knows how to touch all the springs of vanity and weakness in him. He is greatly irritated by the irony of Socrates, but his noisy and imbecile rage only lays him more and more open to trust his assignment. His determination to calm down his thoughts or put bodily into their souls his own words elicits a cry of honor from Socrates. The state of his temper is quite as worthy of remark as the process of the argument. Nothing is more amusing than his complete submission when he has been once truly beaten. At first, he seems to continue the discussion with reluctance, but soon, with apparent goodwill, and he even testifies his interest at a later stage by one or two occasional remarks. When attacked by Glaucon, he is humorously protected by Socrates as one who has never been his enemy and is now his friend. From Cicero and Quintilian, and from Aristotle's rhetoric, we learn that the sophist whom Plato has made so ridiculous was a man of note whose writings were preserved in later ages. The play on his name, which was made by his contemporary Herodicus Aris Red, though was ever bold in battle, seems to show that the description of him is not devoid of verisimilitude. When Thrasymachus has been silenced, the two principal respondents, Glaucon and Adimantus, appear on the scene. Here, as the Greek tragedy, CP intro to Phaedo, three actors are introduced. At first sight, the two sons of Ariston may seem to wear a family likeness, like the two friends Simmias and Cebes in the Phaedo. But on a nearer explanation of them, the similarity vanishes, and they are seen to be distinct characters. Glaucon is the impetuous youth who can just never have enough of etching. CV, the character of him in St. Mem 3:6, the man of pleasure who is acquainted with the mysteries of love, the juvenis qui gaudet canibus, and who improves the breed of animals, the lover of art and music who has all the experiences of youthful life. He is full of quickness and penetration, pitching easily below the clumsy platitudes of Thrasymachus to the real difficulty he turns out to the seamy side of human life, and yet does not lose faith in the just and true. It is Glaucon who says what many be termed the ludicrous relation of the philosopher to the world, to whom a state is of A state of simplicity is a city of pigs. Who is always prepared? We adjust when the argument offers him an opportunity, and who is ever ready to second the humor of Socrates, to appreciate the ridiculous, whether in the connoisseurs of music, or in the lovers of theatricals, or in the fantastic behavior of the citizens of democracy. His witnesses are several times alluded to by Socrates, who, however, will not allow him to be attacked by his brother Adeimantus. He is a soldier, and, like Adeimantus, has been distinguished at the Battle of Megara, Anno 456. The character of Adeimantus is deeper and graver, and the profound objections are commonly put into his mouth. Glaucon is more demonstrative and generally opens the game. Adeimantus pursues the argument further. Glaucon has more of the liveliness and sympathy of youth. Adeimantus is the mature judgment of a grown-up man of the world. In the second book, when Glaucon insists that justice and injustice shall be considered without regard to the consequences, Adeimantus remarks that they are regarded by mankind in general only for the sake of their consequences, and in a similar vein of reflection he urged at the beginning of the fourth book that Socrates fails in making his citizens happy, and his answer that happiness is not the first but the second thing, but not the direct aim, but the indirect consequence of the good government of a state. In the discussion of religion and mythology, Adeimantus is the respondent, but Glaucon breaks in with a slight jest, and carries on the conversation in a lighter tone about music and gymnastics to the end of the book. It is Adeimantus again who volunteers the criticism of common sense on the Socratic method of argument, and who refuses to let Socrates pass lightly over the question of men and children. It is Adeimantus who is the respondent in the more argumentative, as Glaucon in the lighter and more imaginative portions of the dialogue. For example, throughout the greater part of the sixth book, the causes of the corruption of philosophy and the conception of the idea of good are discussed with Adeimantus. Glaucon resumes his place of principal respondent, but he has a difficulty in apprehending the higher education of Socrates, and makes some false hits in the course of the discussion. Once more, Adeimantus returns with the allusion to his brother Glaucon, whom he compares to the contentious state. In the next book, he is again superseded, and Glaucon continues to end. Thus, in a succession of characters, Plato represents the successive stages of morality, beginning with the Athenian gentleman of the olden time, who is followed by the practical man of the day, regulating his life by proverbs and saws. To him such is the wide generalization of the sophists, and lastly come the young disciples of the great teacher, who know the sophistical arguments but will not be convinced by them, and decide to go deeper into the nature of things. These two, Lycephalus, Polemarchus, Thrasymachus, are clearly distinguished from one another. Neither in the Republic nor in any other dialogue of Plato is a single character repeated. The delineation of Socrates in the Republic is not wholly consistent. In the first book, we have more of the real Socrates, such as he is depicted as the memorabilia of Xenophon in the earliest dialogues of Plato and in the Apology. He is ironical, provoking, questioning, the enemy of the Sophists, ready to put on the marks of silliness as well as to argue seriously. But in the sixth book, his enmity towards the Sophists abates. He acknowledges that they are the representatives rather than the corruptors of the world. He also becomes more dogmatic and constructive, passing beyond the range either of the political or the speculative ideas of the real Socrates. In one passage, Plato himself seems to intimate that the time had now come for Socrates, who had passed his whole life in philosophy, to to give his own opinion and not to be always repeating the notions of other men. There is no evidence that either the idea of good and the conception of a perfect state were comprehended in the Socrates teaching, though he certainly dwelt on the nature of the universal and of final causes. C.P. Sen, Mem. Phaedo. And a deep thinker like him, in his 30 or 40 years of public teaching, could hardly have failed to touch on the nature of family relations, for which there is also some positive evidence in the memorabilia mem. The Socratic method is nominally retained, and every inference is either put into the mouth of the respondent or represented as the common discovery of him Socrates. But anyone can see that there is a mere form of which the fiction grows wearisome as the work advances. The method of inquiry. The method of inquiry have passed into a method of teaching in which, by the help of interlocutors, the same thesis is looked at from various points of view. The nature of process is truly characterized by Glaucon, when he describes himself as a companion who is not good for much in an investigation, but can see what he is shown, and may perhaps give the answer to give a case more friend than another. Neither Either can we be absolutely certain that Socrates himself taught the immortality of the soul, which is unknown to his disciple Glaucon in the Republic Cp. Apol. Nor is there any reason to suppose that he used myths or revelations of another world as a vehicle of instruction, or that he would have banished poetry or have denounced the Greek mythology. His favorite oath is retained, and the slight mention is made of the daemonium or internal sign, which is alluded to by Socrates as a phenomenon peculiar to himself. A real element of Socratic teaching, which is more prominent in the Republic than in any of the other dialogues of Plato, is the use of example and illustration Greek. Let us apply the test of common instances. You, say Adimantus, ironically in the sixth book, are so unaccustomed to speak in images, and this use of examples or images, though truly Socratic in origin, it is enlarged by the genius of Plato in the form of an allegory of parable, which embodies in the concrete what was been already described or is about to be described in the abstract. Thus, the figure of the cave in Book 7 is a recapitulation of the divisions of knowledge in Book 6. The composite animal in Book 9 is an allegory of the parts of the soul. The noble captain and the ship and the true pilot in Book 6 are a figure of the relation of the people to the philosophers in the state which has been described. Other figures, such as the dog, or the marriage out of the portionless maiden, or the drums and wives in the egg and nin books, also form links of a connection in long passages, or are used to recall previous discussions. Plato is more true to the character of his master when he describes him as not of this world, and with this representation of him the ideal state and the other paradoxes of the Republic are quite in accordance, though they cannot be shown to have been speculations of Socrates. To him, as to other great teachers, both philosophical and religious, when they look upward, the world seemed to be the embodiment of error and evil. The common sense of mankind has revolted against this view, or has only partially admitted it, and even in Socrates himself the standard judgment of the multitude at times passes into a sort of ironical pity or love. Men in general are incapable of philosophy and are therefore at enmity with the philosopher, but their misunderstanding of him is unavoidable, for they have never seen him as he truly in his own image. They are only acquainted with artificial systems, possessing no native force of truth words, which admit of many applications. Their leaders have nothing to measure with, and are therefore ignorant of their own statute. But they are to be pitied or laughed at, not to be quarrelled with. They mean well with their nostrums. If they could only learn that they are cutting off a hydra's head. This moderation towards those who are in error in one of the most characteristic features of Socrates in the Republic. In all different representations of Socrates, whether of Xenophon or Plato, and amid the differences of the earlier or later dialogues, he always retains the character of the unwearied and disinterested seeker after truth, without which he would have ceased to be Socrates. Leaving the characters, we may now analyze the contents of the Republic, and then proceed to consider 1. The general aspects of the Hellenic ideal of the state. 2. The modern rites on which the thoughts of Plato may be read. Book 1. The Republic opens with a truly Greek scene, a festival in honor of the goddess Bendis, which is held in the Piraeus. To this is added to the promise of an equestrian thales in the evening. The whole work is supposed to be recited by Socrates on the day after the festival to a small party consisting of Critias, Timaeus, Heraclitus, and another. This we learn from the first words of the Timaeus. When the rhetorical advantage of reciting the dialogue has been gained, the attention is not distracted by any reference to the audience, nor is the reader further reminded of the extraordinary length of the narrative. Of the numerous company, there 3 only take any serious part in the discussion, nor are we informed whether in the evening they went to the thales or talked, as in the symposium, through the night. The manner in which the conversation has arisen is described as follows. Socrates and his companion Glaucon are about to leave the festival when they are detained by a message from Polemarchus, who speedily appears accompanied by Adimantus, the brother of Glaucon, and with playful violence compels to remain, promising them not only the thales but the pleasure of conversation with the young, which to Socrates is of what great attraction. They return to the house of Cephalus, Polemarchus' father, now in extreme old age, who is once sitting upon a cushioned seat, gone for a sacrifice. You should come to me oftener, Socrates, for I am too old to go to you, and at my time of life, having lost all the pleasures, I care the more for conversation. Socrates asks him what he thinks of age, to which the old man replies that the sorrows and discontents of age are to be attributed to the tempers of men, and that and that and that age is a time of peace in which the tyranny of the passions is no longer felt. Yes, replied Socrates, but the world will say, Cephalus, that you are happy in old age because you are rich, and there is something in what they say, Socrates, but not so much as they imagine, as Democles replied to the Seriphian. Neither you, if you had been an Athenian, nor I, if I had been a Seriphian, would ever been famous. I might in like manner reply to you. Neither a good poor man can be happy in age, nor yet a bad rich man. Socrates remarks that Cephalus appears not to care about riches, a quality which he ascribes to his having inherited, nor acquired them, and would like to know what he considers to be the chief advantage of them. Cephalus answers that when you are old, the belief in the world below grows upon you, and then to have done justice, and never to have been compelled to the injustice to poverty, and never to have deceived anyone, are felt to be unspeakable blessings. Socrates, who is evidently preparing for an argument, next asks, what's the meaning of the word justice? To tell the truth and pay for your debts. No more than this? Or must we admit exceptions? Or I, for example, to put back into the hands of my friend, who has gone mad, the sword which I borrowed of him when he was in his right hand. There must be exceptions, and yet, said Polemarchus, the definition which has been given has the authority of Simonides. Here, Cephalus retired to look after the sacrifices and bequests, as Socrates facetiously remarks, the position of the argument of his heir, Polemarchus, and the description of old age is finished, and Plato, as his manner is, has as his manners is, has touched the keynote of the whole work in the asking for the definition of justice, further suggesting the question which Glaucon of the was pictures, respecting external goods, respecting external goods, and preparing for the concluding mythos of the word below in the sly allusion of Cephalus. The portrait of the judgment is a natural frontispiece or introduction to the long discourse which follows, and may perhaps imply that in all our perplexity about the matter of justice, there is no difficulty in discerning who is a judgment. The first explanation has been supported by a saying Simonides, and now Socrates has a mind to show that the resolution of justice into two unconnected precepts which have no common principle, fails to satisfy the demands of dialectic. He posits, what did Simonides mean by this saying of his? Did he mean that I was to give back arms to a madman? No, not in that case, not if the parameter the parties are friends and evil would result. He meant that you were to do what was proper, good to friends and harm to enemies. Every act, every act does something to somebody. And following this analogy, Socrates asks, what is this due and proper thing which justice does, and to whom? He answered, the justice does good to friends and harm to enemies. But in what way good or harm? In making alliances with the one and going to war with the other. Then in time of peace, what is the good justice? The answer is that justice is of use in contracts, and contracts are money partnerships. Yes, but how in such partnerships is the judgment of more use than any other man? When you want to have money safely kept and not used, then justice will be useful when money is useless. And there is another difficulty. Justice, like the art of war or any other art, must be of opposites, good at attacks as well as at defense, at stealing as well as at guarding. But then justice is a thief. Do a hero with notwithstanding, like Autolycus, the Homeric hero, who was excellent above all men in death and perjury. To such a pass have you and Homer and Simonides walked us. Though I do not forget that the thieving must be for the good of friends and the harm of enemies. And still there arises another question. Are friends to be interpreted as real or seeming, enemies as real or seeming, and our friends to be only the good and our enemies to be the evil? The answer is that we must do good to our seeming and real good friends, and evil to our seeming and real evil enemies, good to the good, evil to the evil. But ought we to render evil or evil at all, when to do so will only make men more evil? Can justice produce injustice any more than the art of horsemanship can be bad men can make men can make bad horsemen, or hit produce gold? The final conclusion is that no sage or poet ever said that the just return evil, However, this was a maxim of some rich and mighty men, Periander, Perdiccas, or Ismenian the Theban, about BC 398 until 381. Thus, the first stage of aphoristic or unconscious morality is shown to be adequate to the wants of the age. The authority of the poets is set aside, and through the winding mazes of dialectic we make an approach to the Christian precept of forgiveness of injuries. Similar words are applied by the Persian mystic poet to the divine being when the questioning spirit is stirred within him. If because I do evil, thou punish me by evil, what is the difference between thee and me? In this, both Plato and Khayyam rise above the level of many Christian theologians. The first definition of justice easily passes into the second, for the simple words to speak the truth and pay your debts is substituted the more abstract to do good to your friends and harm to your enemies. Either of these explanations gives a sufficient rule of life for plain men, but they both fall short of the precision of philosophy. We may note in passing in the antiquity of casuistry, which not only arises out of the conflict of established principles in particular cases, but also of the effort to attain them, and is prior as well as posterior to our fundamental notions of morality. The interrogation of moral ideas, the appeal to the authority of Homer, the conclusion that the maxim "do good to your friends and harm to your enemies" being erroneous could not have been the word of any great man, are all of them very characteristic of Platonic Socrates. Here, Thrasymachus, who has made several attempts to interrupt, but has hitherto been kept in order by the company, takes advantage of a pause and rushes into the arena, beginning like a savage animal with a roar. Socrates, he says, what fool is this? Why do you agree to be vanquished by one another in a pretended argument? Then he prohibits all the ordinary definitions of justice, to which Socrates replies that he cannot tell how many 12 is if he is forbidden to say 2 times 6, 3 times 4, or 6 times 2, or 4 times 3. At first, Thrasymachus is reluctant to argue, but at length, with a promise of payment of the company and of praise from Socrates, he is induced to open the game. Listen, he says, my answer is that might is right, justice and the rest of the stronger. Now praise me. Let me understand you first. Do you mean that because Polydamas the Western, who is stronger than we are, finds the eating of beef for his interest, the eating of beef is also for interest, who are not so strong? Thrasymachus insisted on the illustration, and his pompous words apparently tended to restore dignity to the argument. He explains his meaning to be that the rulers make laws for their own interests. But suppose, says Socrates, that the ruler of stronger makes a mistake, then the interest of stronger is not his interest. Thrasymachus is saved from the speedy downfall by his discipline Cleitophon, who introduces the word things, not the actual interest of the ruler, but what he thinks of what he seems to be his interest is justice. The contradiction is escaped by the unmeaning evasion, for though his real and apparent interest may differ, what the ruler thinks to be his interest will always remain what he thinks to be his interest. Of course, this was the original assertion, nor is the new interpretation accepted by Thrasymachus himself. But Socrates is disposed to quarrel about words, if as he significantly insinuates, his adversary has changed his mind. In what follows, Thrasymachus does in fact withdraw his ambition that the ruler may make a mistake, for he affirms that the ruler as a ruler is infallible. Socrates is quite ready to receive the new position, which he equally turned against Thrasymachus by the help of the analogy of the art. Every art of science has an interest, but this interest is to be distinguished from the accident interest of the artist. It is only concerned with the good of the things or persons which come under the art. And justice has an interest which is the interest not of the ruler of judge, with the ruler of judge, but of those who came under his sway. Thrasymachus is on the brink of the inevitable conclusion when he makes a broad diversion. Tell me, Socrates, he says, have you notes? What occasion? Why do you ask? Because you agree, she neglects you and lets you go about deviling, and has not even taught you to know the shepherd from the sheep. For you fancy that shepherds and rulers never think of their own interests, but only of their sheep of subjects, whereas the truth is that they fatten them for their use, sheep and subjects alike. An experience proves that in every relation of life, the judgment is the loser and the unjust the gainer, especially where injustice is on the grand scale, which is quite another thing from the petty rogueries of cylinders and burglars and robbers of temples. The language of men proves this, our gracious and blessed tyrann and the like all which tends to slow the just is the interest of the stronger, the injustice is more profitable and also stronger than justice. Thrasymachus, who is better at the speech than the Lucas argument, having the lose the company with words, has a mind to slope the escape, but the other will not let him go, and Socrates adds a humble but earnest request that he will not desert them at such a curse of their fate. And what can I do more for you? He says. Would you would you have me put the words bodily into your souls? God forbid, replied Socrates. But we want you to be consistent in the use of terms, and not to employ physician in an exact sense, and then again separate a ruler in an exact is the words are strictly taken. The ruler and the shepherd look only to the good of the people of flocks and not to their own, whereas you insist the rulers are solely actuated by law of office. No doubt about it, replied Thrasymachus. Then why are they paid? Is not the reason that their interest is not comprehended in the art, and is therefore the concept of another art, the art of pay, which is common to the arts in general, and therefore not identical with any one of them. Nor would any man be a ruler unless he were induced by the hope of reward, or the fear of punishment. The reward is money or honor, the punishment is necessity of being ruled by a man worse than himself. And if a state or church were composed entirely of good men, they would be affected by the last motive only, and there would be as much nolo episcopari as there is at present of the opposite. The satire on the existing governments, if heightened by the simple and apparently incidental manner in which the last remark is introduced. There is a similar irony in the argument that the governors of mankind do not like being in office, and that therefore they demand pay. Enough of this. The other section of Thrasymachus is far more important than just life. That the unjust life is more gainful than the just. Now, as you can, I, Glaucon, are not convinced by him. We must reply to him. But if we try to compare the respective gains, we shall want a judge to decide for us. We had better therefore proceed by making mutual admissions of the truth to one another. Thrasymachus had asserted that perfect injustice was more gainful than perfect justice, and after a little hesitation is induced by Socrates to admit the still great paradox that injustice virtue, justice, and justice vice. Socrates preaches his frankness and assumes the attitude of one whose only wish is to understand the meaning of his opponents. At the same time, he is waving a net in which Thrasymachus is finally enclosed. The mission is elicited from him that the just man seeks to gain an advantage over the unjust only, but not over the just, while the unjust will gain an advantage over either. Socrates, in order to test this statement, employs once more the favorite analogy of the arts. The musician, that the skilled artist of any sort, does not seek to gain more than the skilled, but only more than the unskilled. That is to say, he walks up to a rule, standard, law, and does exceed to it, whereas the unskilled makes random efforts at excess. Thus the skilled falls on the side of the good, and the unskilled on the side of the evil, and the just is the skilled, and the unjust is the skilled. There was great difficulty in bringing Thrasymachus to the point. The day was hot, and he was streaming with perspiration, and for the first time in his life he was seen to blush. But this other thesis that injustice was stronger than justice has not been refuted, and Socrates now proceeds to the consideration of this, which, with the assistance of Thrasymachus, he hopes to clear up. The latter is at first clueless, but in the judicious hands of Socrates is soon restored to good honor. Is there not honor among thieves? Is not the strength of injustice only a remnant of justice? Is the absolute injustice absolute weakness also? A house that is divided against itself cannot stand. Two men who quarrel detract from one another's strength, and he who is at war with himself is the enemy of himself and the gods. No weakness therefore, but semi-weakness flourishes in states. A remnant of God is needed in order to make union in action possible. There is no kingdom of evil in this world. Another question has not been answered. Is the just or the unjust happier? To this we reply that every art has an end, and an excellent of virtue by which the end is accomplished, and is not the end of the soul happiness, and justice the excellence by the soul by which happiness is attained. Justice and happiness being thus lowered down to be inseparable, the question whether the just or the unjust is the happier has disappeared. Thrasymachus replies, let this be your entertainment, Socrates, at the festival of Bendis. Yes, and a very entertainment with which your kindness has supplied me. Now that you have left off scolding, and yet not a good entertainment, but that was my own fault, for I tasted of too many things. First of all, the nature of justice was the subject of inquiry, and then whether justice is spiritual in wisdom or even folly, and then the comparative advantages of just and unjust, and the sum of all is that I know what justice is. How then shall I know whether the just is happy or not? Thus the sophistical fabric has been demolished, chiefly by appealing to the analogy of the arts. Justice is like the arts, in having no external interest, and in not aiming at excess. Justice is to happiness what the employment of workman is to his work. This modern reader is apt to stumble because he forgets that Plato is writing in an age when the arts of the virtues, like the moral and intellectual faculties, were still undistinguished. Among early inquirers into the nature of human action, the arts helped to fill up the void of speculation, and at first the comparison of the arts and the virtues was not perceived by them to be fallacious. They only saw the points of agreement in them and not the points of difference. Virtue, like art, must take means to an end. Good manners are both an art and a virtue. Character is naturally sculpted under the image of a statue, and there are many other features of speech which are readily transferred from art to morals. The next generation cleared up these perplexities, or at least supplied after ages with a further analysis of them. The contemporaries of Plato were in a state of transition, and had not yet fully realized the common sense distinction of Aristotle that the virtue is concerned with action and with production, and is at or or that virtue implies intention and constancy of purpose, whereas requires knowledge only. And yet in the absurdities which follow from some uses of the analogy, there seems to be an intimation conveyed that virtue is more than art. This is implied the reductio ad absurdum that justice is achieved in the dissatisfaction which Socrates expresses at the final result. The expression an art of pay, which is described as common to all the arts, is not in accordance with the ordinary use of language, nor is it employed elsewhere, either by Plato or by any other Greek writer. It is suggested by the argument, and seems to extend the conception of art to doing as well as making. Another flaw or inaccuracy of language may be noted in the words men who are injured are made more unjust, and for those who are injured are not necessarily made worse, but only harmed or ill-treated. The second of the three arguments, that the just does not aim at excess, has a real meaning, to wrap up in an enigmatical form. That the good is of the nature of the finite is a peculiarly Hellenic sentiment, which may be compared with the language of those modern writers who speak of virtue as fitness and of freedom as obedience to law. The mathematical or logical notion of limit easily passes into an ethical one, and even finds a mythological expression in the conception of envy. Greek ideas of measure, equality, order, unity, proportion still linger in the writings of moralists, and the true spirit of the fine arts is better conveyed by such terms than by superlatives. When workmen strive to do better than well, they do confound their skill in covetousness. King John. The harmony of the soul and body, and of the parts of the soul with one another, a harmony fairer than that of musical notes, is a true Hellenic mode of conceiving the perfection of human nature.